Right, hello everyone. Welcome along. This week, the paper that we've asked you to complete, paper 2, week 4, is on natural disasters. You can see there the landslide in Aberfan in Wales back in the 60s it took place. And the second extract, source 2, is all about an earthquake that takes place across Great Britain. Alright, I'll walk through all of the questions as I did the last time. Many of you have been in contact to say that you found that useful, so I'll continue to make them. Please let me know if they are useful because they take quite a bit of time to run through and upload and all the rest. So this week the question is, how do writers convey their attitudes to disasters? The question focuses on attitudes because, again, the name of this paper, paper 2, the AQA paper, is writers' perspectives and viewpoints. So your point of view is the same as your attitude. Your viewpoint is the same as your attitude. How you feel is what we're always concentrating on when it comes to these particular writers. Right, this paper then, again, it's paper 2, so we know that it's going to be non-fiction. There's 2 extracts, they're both about disasters. The first one is all about a landslide, which is when loose material, debris, stones and rock and sand get dislodged, usually by some rainfall or sometimes by an earthquake, that kind of thing, and then move from a very high elevation down to a lower elevation. You might see, sometimes you're driving along the road there and you might see some netting has been put up, some steel netting. That's to stop landslides from occurring. A lot of the time it tends to be mud that causes this problem. Mudslides, you might have heard them called as well. And then earthquakes, obviously you should have done quite a bit about this in geography if you selected that subject. I won't go into too much detail there. All I will say is that Britain itself does not fall too near any plate lines, so it's quite safe when it comes to earthquakes. So it's a small earthquake that's felt in England, in London is where the article writer is in, and it's a huge landslide. So we've got one disaster that kills hundreds of people, and then another which is called a disaster, but the writer should feel slightly differently about it because there's not that many people hurt at all. Right, here is the cheat sheet. Please be using this cheat sheet, okay? It's designed so that you can work through each question and just follow the instructions. For example, if I was doing question 3, I would know to look at this little pink box here, and I know that step 1, I've got to identify a language method. So I'm going to pick a metaphor that the writer uses. Number 2, what have I got to do then? I've got to infer, so I've got to do a little bit of inferring as to what the metaphor might mean, maybe the effect of the metaphor. And then number 3, I have to repeat that process. That's the same for question 2, question 4, all of them. They've all got a step-by-step approach. 1, 2, 3, 4 for question 4. You can see there. Quite a few of you have been struggling a little bit with the distinction between this question and this question. Here's the main distinction. Question 2 and question 4 are very similar because they both ask you to deal with both sources. Now that would be confusing for you because you're thinking, well, I've got to summarise the differences between both sources in this one, but then I've got to compare the differences. What's the difference between compare and summarise? So summarise, you are focusing on, very simply, the main differences. So if I was going to ask you, what are those 2 articles about? You very quickly, in 8 minutes, have to explain to me the main differences in those 2 articles. Well, this one is about this and says this and focuses more on this, whereas this one is about this and focuses on this and is different to the other one because. Alright, so it's a basic comparison, but you're picking out the main differences. Now they'll tell you to do with what. They'll give you a focus area in this question. You'll see it in a little minute. Question 4 is completely different because the compare, we're not comparing the differences in the articles. We are comparing the writers. and it's the writer's attitude. So for the first text here, where we've got a disaster in Aberfan in Wales, hopefully you've watched that little video, we should have some shock and some maybe some empathy and some sympathy and disgust maybe with what had happened. In the second article, we might expect to be a little bit more upbeat because nobody was hurt. Or we might expect to be a little bit more sensational because really you're not used to that kind of thing in Britain. Okay, so this one is all about the writer, and this one is more about the actual text. So for question 2, think about the text, the differences in the text. For question number 4, just think about the differences in the writer's point of view, their viewpoint, their perspective. The best and easiest way to think about it is their feelings. How do they feel? So writer 1 feels this way, the writer of source A seems to feel, whereas the writer of source B seems to feel by comparison. Right, so step 1, read the disaster extracts. We got 2, A and B. I would read A first, then do question 1. Then I would read both before I move on to do question 2. So go through the instructions, do the actual tasks. It's no good if you're not planning these tasks. You need to plan them, otherwise the quality will be no good. And then if you want, you can do 1 question a day. So today, why don't you do question 1? Then come back tomorrow, do question 2, 3, 4. You guys can count. I don't know why I'm writing numbers out. Then submit the stuff on Firefly. Alright, thanks to people who've been sending them over to me. It's great to see how you're getting on. Everything that you need is on Firefly. The instructions have been sent out. They're set on a Monday. We like to get them back by a Sunday. Okay? Right. Basic instructions are there. We know that we get 16 marks for the compare question because we are addressing AO3. So when we're talking about the difference between question 1 and question 2, question 3, the skill is comparison, and it's about the writers. Whereas the skill here is just understanding. So AO1 is just an understanding skill. AO2 is quite important in question 4 as well, because you are asked to talk about the methods and their effects which convey the writer's attitude. Okay, they're using certain methods which shows that they have a certain attitude. Alright, I know that's tricky. Right, we're on specimen material 3, so this is something that's been sent to us by AQA, which means they have approved that we haven't made it up, so you can trust it. Not that you wouldn't trust it if it comes from us. Question 1, here we go. So you've gone and you've read source A. Make sure you do that. You read source A first. The very first thing that you should do is look at the reference number, the line reference for question 1. So you know specifically what question 1 is going to be about, which lines. It's usually the first couple of paragraphs. Alright, there's 2 sources here. One's modern in the 21st century sense, 20th century sense, sorry. And one is old, this is the 19th century. Alright, so we've got a Victorian era, which is this one. And then we've got a modern era, which is this one. Now this one, you look at it and you think, oh, that sounds really old, but it's much more modern than this, okay? 1967, 1863. 1863, or 1868, sorry. Okay, so the earthquake is the old one, the landslide is the more modern one. I know to you, you're thinking, oh, that's really old. And it is, yeah, 1967 is a long time ago, but it's still 20th century. Okay. Question 1, we know is to choose. It's simple. We've got to pick out 1, 2, 3, 4 of these statements that we think are correct. All right. You read the statements. I'm not going to read the statements. I'm going to try and get this PowerPoint nice and quick. You can read the statements on your own. So you read all these statements. You know that you're going to need to look between lines 1 and 21, and you're going to decide which ones are true. Only 4 of them are true. You must pick the ones that you can prove to be true by checking the source. Okay? So it says check the source. If you can't find it in the source, then it's probably not true. Or if you can't find it in the source, go on to the next one and do a process of elimination. Meaning, I'm not sure if this one's right or wrong, so I'm going to go on to this one. And then when I've found 3 that I know are right, maybe I can go back to that one and say, yeah, actually, that one could be correct. All right. This is lines 1 to 21. Let's have a quick read. Few people had ever heard of Aberfan until disaster struck. It was just another of the small mining villages tucked away in the South Wales valleys. Right, there's the first line. Statement A says Aberfan was a well-known place in Wales. Well-known, so famous. Let's have a look. Few people had ever heard of Aberfan. I'm not going to tell you the answer, but to me, that proves or disproves one of the statements I've found already. The next one says the village did not have a chapel or a pub. Did not have a chapel or a pub. It was just another of the small mining villages tucked away in the South Wales valleys, a huddle of anonymous, meaning unnamed, terraced houses of uniform ugliness, unrelieved except for a chapel and a pub. So they have a chapel and a pub. What does this say? It did not have a chapel or a pub. Right, here it says it has a chapel and it has a pub. And here it's saying it did not have a chapel or a pub. Now you've got to pick the ones that are true. Let's move on. C. Pit waste had been building up for at least 100 years. Its heart was the coal pit and its environment, like the others, the debris of a slowly exhausting industry, a disused canal, some decaying rail tracks, a river as black as the Styx. Now the Styx, that's got a little asterisk beside it. I've just put the Black River in hell. All you need to know is that there's a river in Greek mythology that separates the living on this side from the dead on this side, and people have to cross over it in Greek mythology. And the river in Greek mythology is really black. It runs through Hades or hell. Well, Hades is actually the god of the underworld. We won't get into all of that. Doesn't matter. What matters is Styx, the river, very, very black. A general coating of grime over roofs and gardens and hills above, blistered with a century of mining waste. A century of mining waste. How long is a century? I'll leave you to decide that one. Such villages learned to accept the twilight world where most of the men folk worked down the pits. Many died early with their lungs full of coal dust. It says villages learned to accept the twilight world where most of the men folk worked down the pits. Village life centred around the coal pit. I'll leave it for you to decide. Many died early with their lungs full of coal dust. And life was traditionally grim and perilous. Grim and perilous, it says. Here it says life for miners and families was tough. I'll let you decide if that proves it. Disaster, in fact, was about the only news that ever came out of the valleys. The sudden explosion underground, miners entombed alive, or silent death in the dark from gas. There wasn't much good news in Aberfan. So this one's talking about disasters. So you have to decide there was, there wasn't. Is that true? Is this statement true? Again, up to you. I'm going to let you decide. Last one, the men lived long and healthy lives. It says here, most of the men folk worked down in the pits. Many died early with their lungs full of coal dust. Again, I'm not going to tell you the answer, but have a little look at this. You decide if this is true. The men lived long and healthy lives. It says here that many died early with their lungs full of coal. Right, pick your 4, write them in your book, and off we go. So here's the answers. You can see them here anyway. I'll animate them. The 4 true statements are the pit waste had been building up for 100 years. That was a century. Village life centred around the coal pit. Yeah. Life for miners was tough. It says it was grim. There wasn't much good news in Aberfan. It says there was gas leaks and people died by all sorts of things. Okay, so the ones that were wrong were they lived long and healthy lives, obviously not. Mining was a new and thriving industry. It's a very old industry. The village did not have a chapel or a pub. It did have a chapel or a pub, so that one is not true. Aberfan was a well-known place in Wales. No, it's a sleepy little village, it's described as. Right, good time to take a break. Done for the day. Come back for question 2 tomorrow. Now for me, I'm going to plough on to question 2. Question 2. This is a picture of the disaster afterwards. Hopefully you've watched that video. The primary school was one of the places that was hit, which was right here. Try and show you. So the primary school was about here. You can kind of see the diggers there excavating. I think there was over 101 children killed, something like 8 teachers. Alright, question 2 is summarise. Now, we know summarise, I've talked about it at the very start of this PowerPoint as well. Summarise is basically saying how source A is different from source B with a particular focus on what they say. Here it says both sources give details about the places where the events occur. And then it says use details, which means you've got to quote from both sources to write a summary of the differences between Aberfan, which is in Wales, and London, which is in England. Okay, city, small little village. Already we know this one's going to be easy enough, isn't it? So I've got to talk about the differences between the 2 places. Alright, just the 2 places. Now I've got to read both sources, so I've got to go back, read both sources. I haven't read source B yet, so you go away and you read this one now. And while you're reading this one, you think about how London is different to Aberfan. This source mentions the entirety of Great Britain. It talks a little bit about Birmingham in particular. So this one is actually based on the whole of Great Britain, whereas this one is just this little town in Wales. Right, read both sources, think about the locations. It's all about places. I've got the landslide in Aberfan and the earthquake in Britain, but the writer is from London. Here we go. We're going to write a key differences list between Aberfan and London. I'm going to rattle through it. I'm going to do it really, really quick. So Aberfan versus London. I can do Great Britain here if I like, because it does talk about other places. So here's my example. I could pull out a little quotation just to get us started. So here's my quote. I do have to quote. I must quote in my summary question. It says, the tips grow everywhere, straddling the hillsides. Okay, so the tips, this is the danger. These are coal tips. So the threat in Aberfan is from these mountains, can you see them there, of like coal that are piled up above. So the threat is a landslide. Whereas in source B, in London, we are situated on a deep bed of clay, is the quotation I could use. Now, a deep bed of clay, I could say the threat is from below. So this is soft ground for an earthquake. Right, really simple differences now I'm going to do. Aberfan, number 1. It's a small town, isn't it? So I've got a small village. I think it's described as sleepy. There's an idea. Whereas in source B, London is a city. Correct. Huge. I think it's described as, there you can see, a metropolis. Not just where Superman lives. A huge, big city is what metropolis means. And number 2, another difference. So this is a small village. So it's going to have a small population. But there were hundreds of casualties, which is a big percentage, isn't it? A huge percentage. If you've got a small population and there's hundreds of casualties, that is a very big percentage. Whereas in source B, London has got a huge population. It doesn't mention that there's any casualties though. it says in source A that they've got a church, they've got a pub, they've got terraced housing. But in source B, they've got industries, they've got factories, they've got a railway, which is massive, huge. In fact, the railway that's described in source A is effectively abandoned or disused. Okay, so there's simple differences I could talk about. Those are the main ones. If you pull out a few more, you'll see some examples now. Right, a summary paragraph. I've got to quote, which I've done, and I have to infer. This is the tricky part, all right? This is the bit that people find difficult. Pulling out a quotation, easy. Inferring a little bit from it, not so easy. Right. Aberfan is a small village, and at its heart was the coal pit. So, as an examiner, I'm saying, yeah, they have quoted. They're going to have to quote from both sources for me to give them the marks. But first of all, I'm taking this because I'm saying, yeah, they've quoted the first source. However, this is where I'm looking to give them the marks, all right? This is the main thing. And this candidate has said, it seems like a harsh place to live and work. That's an inference. They've figured that out. It seems like. They haven't just used the quote there. And the reason this candidate has figured it out is because the railway tracks are decaying. So there's a further quote. All right, so they are very simply quoting from both sources and inferring. All right, there's only three things you have to do. You have to talk about both sources, and then you quote, infer, quote, infer. The writer says the heart was a coal pit. I'm going to infer from that. Its heart was a coal pit. That means that everything else is built around it. So the whole village is built around the coal pit. That's an inference. Okay. I'll try another one for you. I'll do from the second one. Here it says trains at full speed and a constant rumble. So full speed, constant rumble implies that London is busy. So my quote, full speed rumble, inference, London seems quite busy. They've got a big population. They've got lots of commuters going to and from work. Okay? This one, have a little read through it. This would get 6 marks out of your 8. All right? There is an example as well on the next slide. Wants to fight me. There's an example on the next slide of a 7 to 8. So this is the one that you want to use to get 8 marks. You've got your quotations. I've emboldened them for you so they stand out. You just have to quote and then infer. And you're going to try and do that as many times as possible in 8 minutes. All right? And it's all to do with the different places the sources are about. So Aberfan is a small village that few people have heard of. Small is your inference from few people have heard of. It's hidden away from view, tucked away. So tucked away is my quote. Hidden from view is the inference. All right, nothing too complex here. You try and do as many as possible. You want the first few lines to be about source A, next few lines to be about source B. And it's a brilliant idea to use these connective phrases. Whereas, similarly, in contrast, although, while, albeit, whilst. Aberfan is a small village, whereas London, with its great river, is a huge city. Okay? So your job, take 8 minutes, have a go at writing a summary that is as good as this or better. I'm going to have a go as well. Look, here's it, AQA's example. Here's the example I have written for you. I'm going to do another one very quickly just now with you to help you out. So there's my example that I've written for you before. I'm going to do another one now. It's not going to take 8 minutes. I'm going to put 8 minutes on the clock. I'm going to do it in less than 8 minutes, okay? So I'm going to say in source A, I'm going to use my structure. In source A, we see a tiny mining village which is a little run down. The quote I could use to support that would be, I think it says a disused with a disused railway and grimy terraces. Okay, so grimy terraced housing. A tiny village in Wales was just a little rundown, so it's got a disused railway and grimy terraced housing. Here, life revolves around the coal pit, which is at its heart. That's my quote. So everything in this village revolves around the coal pit, which is at its heart. And the town seems, let's say, I don't want to say unevolved. Don't want to say backwards either. I want to say not progressive. Or varied, like London of source B, which is busy, for the rumbling there, which is A, busy, colossal, alive with traffic, workers, and all sorts of industries, not just coal. Okay? Right, there's my example. I've tried to use this exact formula here just to help you out. Right, leave my one up to help you out if you so wish. Question 3. Might have a break there. Come back to me tomorrow for question 3 if you so wish. Question 3. It's only source A. This is the language question. This one's easy. I'm only doing AO2. So I am literally identifying a language method and talking about the effect of that language method every single time. And there's a bucket load of language methods I can talk about. Adjectives, adverbs, metaphors, simile, personification, repetition, listing. I could go on and on and on. I'm not going to. Okay, how does the writer use language? It's the same as question 2 in paper 1. This time though you're getting 12 marks instead of 8 marks. You only get 8 marks in paper 1. So all in all there's 20 marks for doing exactly the same thing across 2 papers. I've got to read lines 27 to 40. So I'm going to go away and read those lines. If I quote outside those lines, then I get 0 marks. Okay? Please don't quote outside the lines. For whatever you quote outside the lines, you won't get any marks. They'll put you at the top of level 2 at best if you manage to do that. Right, here's the 27 to 40. What words or phrases would you pick out? Excuse me. You should get about 3 quotes in this question, alright? So for 12 marks, I'm going to divide that by 3. So I'm going to do 4 minutes per mini paragraph. I'm going to write 4 minutes where I pick out a quote and I infer something, or I talk about the effect. Then I'm going to pick out another quote where I infer something, talk about the effect. And then I'm going to do it for a third time. If I do that, that's 12 minutes. 3 times I should be able to do it. I've emboldened some words here for you. They should stand out. Those are the ones that I would choose. But it's entirely up to you. I've got a table on the next slide to help you out as well. I'll read through it with a little bit of emphasis because it just might help you out to hear somebody else's voice read it aloud. Now, I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges in the exam, especially if there are some words that you're not familiar with. Right, it says, on the mountain above Aberfan, there were 7 such tips. The evening sun sank early behind them. To some of the younger generation, they had always been there, as though dumped by the hand of God. They could be seen from the school windows immediately below them, rising like black pyramids in the western sky. But they were not as solid as they looked. It was known that several had moved in the past, inching ominously down the mountain. What was not known, however, was that the newest tip, number 7, was a killer with a rotten heart. It had been begun in Easter 1958 and was built on a mountain spring, most treacherous of all fountains. Gradually, over the years, the fatal seeping of water was turning tip 7 into a mountain of moving muck. Then one morning, out of the mist, the unthinkable happened, and the tip came down on the village. The children of Pantglass Junior School had just arrived in their classrooms and were right in the path of it. They were the first to be hit by the wave of stupefying filth, which instantly smothered more than 100 of them. Okay, so you can get how the writer here is using language to try and show that these coal tips are very, very dangerous. If you've watched that little video, you'll know how heartbreaking this tragedy was. And I don't think in that video it mentions actually that this was, if this had have happened an hour later, all of those children would have been fine because it was the last day of term, and they were being let out. And the school itself was one of the closest buildings to this tip, so horrendously unlucky, or down to horrible human error as well. Okay, so there's a table here. So I've got 1 quote, 2 quotes, 3 quotes. Then I have to talk about the method that the writer has used, and I have to infer the effect of that method on the reader. Okay? I'm going to do it one at a time. I'm going to pick a different colour pen because I can. Right, here we go. Number 1. The tips had always been there as though dumped by the hand of God. I'm going to do one example here. I'm going to leave you to do the others yourself because I'm going to write an example using this. So they'd always been there as though dumped by the hand of God. Right, so I might zoom in. I'm going to try and zoom in on something. I'm going to zoom in on the word always. Always implies to me that those have been there forever. But they probably haven't been there forever. They can't have been there forever. This mine is man-made. Then I might talk about the metaphor, the personification. They had been dumped, that's a verb, by the hand of God. Dumped is weird. It's a strange word to use in the same sentence as God, because you think about God maybe being all-powerful and not making mistakes. Dumped is often has connotations of abandonment. So maybe I might talk something about that. Right, so I've got my quote. I know that I'm going to zoom in on the metaphor, the hand of God. It's not literally the hand of God, so there's some personification there. It's almost like God's hand there is like a little JCB digger or something like that that's dumped out all of this coal residue. And then I've got the adverb always, which suggests that it's always been there. So here's my inference. The adverb always suggests that people had become complacent about how safe it would be, because it had never moved before and they assumed that it would not now. This adverb always seems to imply that those stones have been there forever and therefore must be safe. Okay, so my first one, my inference is that always been there seems to imply that, they must be safe. They've been there forever. They would have fallen before now if it wasn't safe. You just assume. In the same way that people make mistakes because they go, we've always done it this way, and they might not see the inherent danger, the built-in danger. Right, the hand of God. The metaphor, the hand of God, dumped by the hand of God, suggests that the tip, this coal tip, felt natural. God had placed it there. It was part of the landscape, not a dangerous man-made mountain. So they think that it's perfectly natural. It's been there forever. That it's safe. That it's not dangerous. All of that is implied by it had been dumped there by the hand of God because it's been there forever. Didn't even know anything about it. Right. Next quote is this one. You can see the method there and a little bit of an inference. You should do the last one on your own. There for the challenge. Or if you want, you can choose your own quote. identify the method, talk about your inference, okay? I'm going to show you an example then. Right, so say 27 to 40. How does the writer use language to describe the cold tips? This one's going to get 9 marks. The writer personifies the tip as a killer, which implies that it is a dark and threatening figure. I'm going to let you read through these on your own. You can see the difference in quality, okay? All that we really see in quality difference between this one, which is a level 3 answer. Oh, this is a level 3 answer, and this is a level 4 answer. The only difference is the detail of the inference, okay? So you can see that they're very similar quotes. Killer with a rotten heart, rotten. Killer with a rotten heart, rotten. That stays the same, but look at the detail in their inference in this one, okay? I'm going to show you an example, and then you can make your own. You can keep these two in front of you. You can use the same quotations. That's absolutely fine. It's about practicing to infer. Try to infer something different. You're not going to help yourself if you're just going to write down the same ideas with the same inference, with the same quote. It's not going to help you. What will help you is if you have a go at doing something different. So you can use this one, which is easy, or you can use this one, which is a little bit trickier. I'm going to do the trickier one just now for you. Okay. Question 3. The writer presents the tip as the villain of the story. All right, I have to remember the quote. The quote I was going to use was, "A killer with a rotten heart." Laptop's fighting with me today, isn't it? Hope you're getting good value out of this fight that the laptop's having with me. Come on. There we go. Right. So the writer presents the cold tip as the villain of the story. I'm going to say this is apparent. This is apparent in its description as a killer with a rotten heart. So we see that in this choice, I'm going to say this choice, to convey the tip as a personified villain who seeks to murder, killer, a killer seeks to murder. This personification of the tip as a villain who seeks to murder the children and villagers has the effect of, and what is it doing? So a killer with a rotten heart, rotten is the adjective I could talk about there. Killer, again, oh, I know that this is something used to describe, but here, collectively, we're using a noun. So the personified villain, it's not actually really a villain. So we know that this is all personification. Who seeks to murder the children and villagers has the effect of, let's say, okay, so the personified villain who wants to murder the children and villagers creates tension or concern for what will come. So the writer is trying to ensure, what's the writer trying to do to the audience? So the audience begin to see So here's what the writer wants. The writer would deliberately use the personification of the coal tip. So I've got this coal tip, this mountain of coal is sitting there. And essentially what the writer has done is given this coal tip eyes, given it a snarl, given it some teeth, made it sound like a horrible animal that's going to kill. And we've personified this villain using the adjective rotten to suggest that it is a murderer. It wants to kill the villagers. And the reader will feel tense, will feel concerned, will be worried about the victims. So that's who we become concerned for. And the audience see the coal industry, this monster, as the enemy. And we hope that the villagers will come to no harm. But we know that their little houses are going to get overcome by this coal that's coming flying down the mountain. Okay? You're going to try and do that times 3. So, quote, I'm going to talk about method, and then I'm going to infer. So you can go Q, M, I, if that's a quick and easy way to remember. So I'm going to identify my language method, that's my method. I'm going to infer. I haven't got quote in here, but you know that you're obviously going to have to quote. Okay, so identify my language method. I'm going to use a topic sentence. I'm going to use my quotation. And then I'm going to infer. You can use these stock phrases. Okay, I'm going to take a break after question 3 there if you like. Question 4, we're getting there. Another 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we should have done. Right, here we go. Question 4 is compare. It says, for this question, you need to refer to the whole of source A, all of source A, all of source B. The different ideas and perspectives of the events that they describe. So this is all about, would you believe it, the perspectives and ideas. So this is their point of view, this is their feelings, this is their viewpoints. That is, after all, the name of the paper. Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives is the name of the paper. I keep saying it over and over again. So essentially, it boils down to this. How do the writers feel about their respective disasters? I must use these bullet points. If I don't use these bullet points, I have not got a hope. So I've got to compare their ideas and perspectives. So I've got to talk about both sources there, both writers. Compare the methods they use. Okay, that's important because some people forget that. The methods they use, that means I'm getting marks for AO2 as well. And I do. I get marks for AO2 built in to my AO3, which is my comparison. And then it says I've got to refer to both texts. So this is really simple. What these 3 bullet points mean are very, very simple. So, I've got to talk about their views. That's their views, their attitudes, their perspectives. I've got to talk about the methods that they use. And it says support your response finally, so I have to quote. It's very simple. However, depending on the 2 texts that you get, can be complicated to work it out. Right. Mind map plan, first of all. Could you take 2 minutes? Can you think about the perspective that the first writer, source A, has versus source B? Okay, pause the video, take 2 minutes, write down the viewpoint of the Aberfan writer and then the viewpoint of source B. Don't know why it says A. Source B's writer, London earthquake person. Okay, take a little minute. I'll show you mine then. Here are mine. So source A, what's their ideas, what's their perspectives, how do they feel? I haven't, this is the step I'm doing just now. I'm not talking about the methods yet, that comes next. So source A feels sympathetic and angry about the disaster that occurred. Okay, so there's a bit of anger here. Source A is reporting as an outsider and sees the village as small and outdated. Okay, so essentially, it's like a tourist or a historian is writing this article. It's actually an essay. So maybe we've got an anthropologist on the case here. This is somebody looking back on what happened and wondering why. There's an investigative tone. Third one, seems to view coal mining in a negative light. So it seems to be quite critical. Now I'm comparing. So does source B have the same feeling? Let's see. Source B seems to be surprised and fearful about the potential of earthquakes. They seem to be a little bit jokey. They know that nobody's been killed. There might be a little bit of exaggeration, this second one. So they seem to exaggerate the danger and disaster because there was nobody hurt. They also seem to think that the earthquake might be a warning and worries about future events. So this person seems to be really interested in geology and geography and fault lines and tectonic plates and all sorts of things like that. Seems to be very interested in it. Obviously doesn't have the science to back it up at that point, but is interested nonetheless. Now, it was written in 1868, I think, so they didn't know all that we know now about earthquakes. Right, here's the question. I'm going to use my formula. The formula is, I'm going to find a comparison. I'm going to say, source A feels this way, whereas source B feels this way. When I do that, I'm going to have to pick a method to analyse for both, and I'm going to have to infer for both. So I'm repeating some of the same skills that I've used in the language question. I'm repeating some of the same skills that I've used in the summary question, and I'm combining them together. So essentially this could read, how have the writers used language to convey their different ideas and perspectives of the events that they describe? The language there is bullet point 2. Okay, so that's the AO2. This is AO3. This is really AO1 because you're just picking out your quotations. That's just basic understanding. Right, so here is my formula. Again, I'm going to show the examples. Come on, lads. Just remind you that you got to talk about both sources, got to talk about methods, got to talk about attitudes. Here's the example that I've written here. So, source A, the writer's attitude. The writer's attitude seems to be one of sadness. They are respectful and sad about the disaster and want to report the causes. So that's the attitude. That's their attitude. Here's my quotation. Then one morning out of the midst, the unthinkable happened. Here's my method. One morning is a time phrase. The adjective unthinkable is an adjective, obviously. I nearly said the adjective is an adjective. Unthinkable is an adjective. And then I'm going to infer. Okay, so attitude, method, inference. I'm going to talk about the writer's attitude. I have to support that with a quotation. I've done that. I have to support that with the method that the writer has used, and then I can infer. So, the writer is sad and respectful. This is clear in the line, one morning out of the midst, the unthinkable happened. The adjective unthinkable and the time phrase one morning, then one morning, it almost sounds like something intense is going to happen in a movie script, and that's exactly what happens. Suggests the writer is shocked. That's my inference. They are horrified by what transpired. The adjective unthinkable suggests that even a pessimist, so a real cynicist, somebody who looks on the downside of things all the time, even one of those people would not foresee, look into the future and see such a shocking, devastating disaster. Then, importantly, I've only done half. This is half because this is all source A. I have to go on to source B now. So source B, in source B, I might say that the writer's attitude is equally dramatic. So I'm comparing. Similar. Equally dramatic, but it seems to be unnecessary miles below the surface. So the adjective, enormous. and the rhetorical question, who knows? So this is my method, this is my quotation, this is my comparison, my attitude. I'm always talking about the point of view, the attitude of the writer. This writer here seems to be dramatic. This writer is dramatic, but seems to be dramatic in a respectful way, whereas this one seems to be over dramatic, would you say? Hyperbolic, maybe? The adjective enormous and the rhetorical question, who knows, suggests that the writer is worried about the earthquakes getting worse or wants to create some tension or fear in his readership. To me, that's what's going on. The rhetorical question suggests that he feels, that even though this was a minor earthquake, worse consequences could be ahead. He feels disaster could be imminent. Don't know what this was supposed to be. The rhetorical question suggests that he feels disaster could be imminent, or that even though this was minor, worse consequences could be ahead. Right, I'm going to use this. You should use this. This is always what you should be using. This is your method sheet, your cheat sheet. So please use it. I'm going to have a go. When my computer stops fighting with me, I will have a go. Right. Here are the answers. This one is a level 3. This one is a level 4. I'm conscious of time. I want to keep this under an hour for you. So I'm going to rattle through those provided by AQA. So here are some of the things you can talk about. This is fine. Focus on this one. If you get to this level and you were able to produce something at between 9 and 12 marks, I'm very pleased with how you're getting on. And it's not a huge leap to make then. The only difference is, again, to do with how detailed your inference is. How well do you understand the writer's attitudes? Okay? Right, let's do a quick example together. So here's how I structure it. I'm going to say, in source A, here I go, look, the writer of source A seems to feel. I'm going to say the writer So I'm going to say, in source A, the writer feels outraged and horror-struck throughout by the disaster in the tiny village. Now, I'm going to need to support that. I'm going to have to quote. So that's my attitude. I'm saying the writer feels outraged. I have to support that with a quotation. Okay? So I could reuse something from earlier on if I want. I'm going to go back here. Let me just pick a quotation here. Actually, I'll just use that same one. Can't remember off the top of my head. So in source A, the writer feels outraged and horror-struck throughout by the disaster in the tiny village. So they say, the writer says that the so I might say, the children were murdered by a killer with a rotten heart. Here, the personification further enhances the reader's horror at the helplessness of the students in the school. Now, I can make a nice comparison here. Alright, so I have talked about my attitude. This is point of view, attitude. I've got my quotation. So here's my quotation. Just use a different colour here to show you. So killer with a broken heart, there is my quotation. Then I've talked about my method. I've identified the method and I've talked about what it does. It further enhances the horror of the reader at the helplessness of the students. They are at the mercy of a killer with a rotten heart. Right, I can make a nice comparison now because I can say that other people are helpless in source B, but they don't seem to be in quite as much danger. So I'm going to say equally in source B, those who experience the earthquake are unprepared and ignorant as to its source. So they don't know where this earthquake has come from and they don't know why. I can't remember the quote off the top of my head, but it's something about them getting out of bed in the middle of the night. I think shaken to the foundations is the quote that I'm going to use here. So equally in source B, those who experience the earthquake are unprepared and ignorant to its source. The writer, I'm coming back to attitude now, gotta go to attitude. The writer feels or suggests that the danger is minimal, or was, this time, but could grow. And I'm going to say shaking foundations. It's my quotation. Didn't damage lives or property, but the writer is, let's say, dramatic. Okay, so the writer is dramatic about further disasters. So I'm following this formula again. You can see here, equally in source B. So now I have talked about both texts. Those who experience the earthquake are unprepared and ignorant as to its source. So there's a little comparison. It is compare, remember? So I'm talking about the different experiences. I've got to talk about the writer though. The writer feels that the danger was minimal. They recognise that actually nothing that bad happened. Okay, so that's different to the outrage felt by the first writer. The danger was minimal, but could grow in future. Then I need to quote. I've got to quote. Always must quote. Support your response. And I've got to talk about method. This time, but they could grow in future. The shaking foundation didn't damage lives or property, but the writer is dramatic about the potential of further damage. So I've got to talk about this method. Shaking. The verb shaking here connotes a fear felt by the public. Okay, so the shaking felt by the public, and then I can compare. Similar to that described in source A. Okie dokie. Right, not perfect, but a very simple walkthrough of the formula. Hopefully you find it useful. That brings us to the end. You've got everything that you need here. The video is online now for you. All of the resources are there as well. Hope it's helpful. Right, thanks for tuning in.